Thank you, sir. I was wondering, I believe that you're working with the Enochian system again because you got more equipment made for you. So my question was concerning that system, like the Call of the 30 Aethers. What are those? Uh, I don't know which of you would call them guardians, but are those angels? And anything else you want to add on the Enochian system? I'd love to hear.
No, see, you shouldn't say that second part because I'm sure you guys would like to get out of here at some point today.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting for this to go
um,
3 hours.
well, first of all, I'm not working it again yet. I can't really say I ever stopped because the Enochian system is still foundational to a lot of stuff I do. But yeah, you probably know the story. I think I tell it in my book, Essential Enochian Grimoire, that once I got all the language stuff done, the angel said, okay, now don't bug us again until you've done everything else, that we told Dee to do. So that means getting the table, getting the equipment, getting the books. In fact, the Essential Enochian Grimoire was the result of those instructions. I started just like I'd done with the language. I went back into the journals and I pieced together all the info about building the tools and doing the right rituals exactly as Dee had been instructed. So it's really been years since I've talked to the angels. I've got my old Enochian equipment in there, but none of it is to spec the way the angels said it needed to be done. Everything was kind of fudged. Like my 7 ensigns of creation, they're on 10, but I actually drew them on cardstock and glued the cardstock onto the 10. I had a seal of truth, but the seal of truth was actually a wooden disc that I had drawn the seal onto. I had a holy table, but it was a Golden Dawn style double cube altar that I had painted the Enochian holy table on top of. So it's like I had everything, even the small seals of truth I put underneath the 4 corners of that altar, and they were also painted on wooden discs. So everything I did my early Enochian work with was all kind of just what I had available and what I could afford at the time. So yes, I have spent the last several years, number one, saving up money because getting a full set of Enochian gear is ridiculously expensive. The table cost me something like $1,200, I think, and it's not even finished. We're gonna stain it, and Carrie's gonna paint it. If I had had Tabitha Cicero paint that table, Chick Cicero built it, and if I had had Tabitha Cicero paint it, it would have cost me maybe even several $1,000s before it was over. And that's not including the cost of the 10 talismans. 10, pure 10 is real expensive these days for some reason. Silk tablecloth. Silk is expensive, and I'm going to have that hand dyed. I'm going to have Don Craig's widow, Holly Craig Helton. She's going to dye the silk cloth for me. So this is going to be a real powerhouse of an object. Gold ring, that's expensive. So years and years have gone by, and saving up for and slowly collecting the things I need has resulted in almost completion. I haven't even seen my table with my own eyes yet. Once I get my second vaccine shot, then I'll be allowed to go over to Chick's house and get the table and bring it home for us to complete it. So that's me rambling on where I'm at right now. When I do get it here and completed, we have to make the seals of truth. I do have new ensigns of creation incoming. Those weren't cheap either. We're doing a barter job for those, in fact. And then I'm going to do the 14-day initiation ritual where you call all the angels of the 4 watchtowers and basically contractually get their oaths to work with you and proceed forward from there. And that's going to be my way of consecrating and initiating the new holy table setup once I get it completed. And I've now forgot what your initial question was. What were you asking me about specifically?
About the Call of the 30 Aethers and what those entities actually were, and actually what the purpose of it is. I
That's
have
right.
not read your book yet on that.
Oh, definitely do. It's kind of a beginner's guide. I never felt that Enochian magic is really for beginners. But it is a good primer. That's how I wrote it, was to be a primer for Enochian. It's kind of better if you come into it knowing a little bit. So having that plug out of the way, I guess. Now the 30 ethers. Here's how the Enochian system works. Okay, so let me help you conceptualize this a little bit. Are you familiar with the book of Loga?
Somewhat.
Okay. It looks like when it's written, it looks like Loa Gaith, but the angels actually say in the journals it's pronounced.
Yeah, I know, I've heard it. All right, but that's it.
Okay. I'm going to explain to you guys, and this isn't going to be a long discussion. It's simpler than you think it is, but I'm going to explain to you how Enochian magic works. I mean, its whole basis. Its entire basis is the Book of Loga. John Dee used basically Solomonic methods. He was working with the Heptameron angels, but if you read the grimoire called the Arbitel, that gives all of these rules and about how magic works, how you have to do magic. And Dee was basically applying all of those rules, but instead of using the Olympian spirits, he was using the Heptameron angels. So the first thing he did was he looked in the book and said, which of these 7 archangels is in control right now? And the Arbitel said, well, that would be the Archangel of Venus, and there is the Olympian spirit Haggith. So he said, okay, fine, I'll just call the Heptameron Archangel of Venus, because he wanted to use Christian angels, not what he felt might be pagan spirits, the Olympian spirit. Okay, so he calls the ruler of the universe, Anael, and he says, hey, Anael, I have this stone here, this crystal ball, and I would like to know, is there a spirit attached to it? And Anael said, yes. The Archangel Michael is attached to it. You can talk to him through that. And said, now that we've done this, you can go to him, and I'm not going to appear to you again. And she left. So then he employs the crystal ball, essentially using the method similar to what is described in the DCIS system. I think it's called. It's the the name is slipping me. But it's called the Trithemius method of scrying into crystals. And he was basically using that kind of method with his crystal ball. And he tried to contact Michael, and lo and behold, all 4 of the main archangels were attached to that crystal. And the one who took control was Uriel, because Uriel is the gatekeeper. And he brought in the other 3 archangels and basically was kind of the master of ceremonies for the entire Enochian revelation. So every entity in the Enochian system is an angel. Most of them are subservient to one of the 4 archangels. So, for example, Raphael came in, and he's the one that revealed the language, the angelical language. He's the one that brought the Book of Loga. He is the one who revealed the alphabet. And then, Michael is the one who revealed all the holy furniture, the holy table, the ring, the lamp, and all that stuff. All that came from Michael. So each one of the archangels, each one of the 4, had a part to play and a portion of the system to reveal. Now that it all began with Dee asking his new friends, these 4 archangels, he said, I want to read the Book of Enoch. Now we can go online right now and read the Book of Enoch. It's called 1 Enoch, or the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. But that text was lost in the West for generations. It's called the Ethiopic Book of Enoch because it was finally rediscovered in an Ethiopic Bible, where it had been all this time, but it had been all but eradicated in the West. And so Dee knew the book existed. I mean, there are references. I think it's in the book of Jude. There's a direct reference and quote from the Book of Enoch. So anyone who's studying the Bible, like Dee was, would have wanted to know more about this book. And so he asked the angels, can you bring it to me? And they said, oh, you want Enoch's book? Sure. So Raphael came, and Brian said, here's Enoch's book. And he pulled out the Book of Loga. And this is a little difficult to understand. So I hope I don't confuse issues here. But there is a text that we call the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, which is the story of Enoch. And it tells the story of him being taken into the heavens by the archangels, given a tour of all seven heavens. It was basically Merkava mysticism. He was shown around all seven heavens. And lastly, he was taken into a special chamber in the highest heaven, where he was shown what are called the tablets of destiny. The tablets of destiny are where God writes everything. Everything that ever is, was, or will be is all contained in these books written in celestial fire. And they said, we're going to give you some time, and we're going to let you copy down. They say this to Enoch, we're going to let you copy everything you can out of these books. And when he was there, and this is all described in the Book of Enoch, he transcribed 366 books or 365 books or something like that, of knowledge and wisdom that he got out of these celestial tablets. And he brought them to earth, and they had all sorts of things in them, like the instructions that Noah used to build the ark were in the books that Enoch brought back. And but when the flood happened, oh, and by the way, King Solomon's wisdom was supposedly something that was contained in that book. So a lot of the biblical, the Old Testament, people that had these great powers and great wisdom and stuff, that they were getting this out of these books that Enoch had transcribed. But when the flood happened, they were lost. So any of the wisdom that remained from them is just what was passed down through Noah's line and etc. Okay. So when Dee asked, can I read the Book of Enoch? The angels didn't go get the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. They brought the celestial tablets, the tablets that Enoch had copied while he was in heaven. And that is what the Book of Logah is. That the 49 tables of the Book of Logah are the celestial tablets. And they contain all the knowledge that ever is, was, or will be within them. So the Book of Logah is the foundation of the entire Enochian system. The Watchtower system with the angels of the four quarters of the earth, as well as the ethers. Those are basically, that's just another word for heavens. Those are the heavens that stretch from earth to the celestial throne. Even the Heptarchia. The Heptarchia is a little different. That was kind of the method of working the angels gave to Dee in order to use the Book of Logah. But all the other systems that I just described, the watchtowers and the ethers and anything else that came out of that, are all things that came out of the Book of Logah itself. So when the angels gave Dee that book and told him to copy it, and they gave him a magical practice, which they called in their language, in the angels' language, Jebophal. That was a method that they claimed they had originally given Enoch to access and open the tables in the Book of Logah. And each table in the Book of Logah is one of the gates of heaven. There are 48 gates of heaven that we can open. We can't open the 49. And when we open those gates using Jebophal, we gain contact with those angels, and they can then reveal all sorts of wisdom out of the Book of Logah for you. And the Watchtower system is an example of that, and the ethers are an example of that. So yeah, that's how it plugs into the main system. And yes, those are all angels. That's basically the Enochian system's version of the Merkava system. You have 30 heavens instead of 7. It's because of the Gnostic influence on Enochian magic. And you have 30 heavens, and you can work your way up through those heavens toward the divine throne, learning from the angels as you go. And those 30 heavens represent the last 30 tables of the Book of Logah. So you've actually got 18 tables before those that you can also open and get information and knowledge from the angels. And then you can go right into the ethers. I know that doesn't entirely simplify the subject. That gives you an idea of the structure of how it all works. And that, yes, these are angels. These are not aliens from another dimension. These are not some other species of being. This is all delivered by the 4 archangels directly through the tablets that Enoch himself was shown in what we call the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. And all the governors in the 30 ethers, all the heptarchic royalty angels, all the angels on the watchtower, those are actually angels. And just like Michael and Gabriel, Raphael, and all of those guys.
Thank you very much.
Not a problem, not a problem.
So I had 3 questions, but you've already answered one of them. The other 2
Awesome.
were, they're both connected with Egypt. The first one is, do you think you could talk a bit about how the sort of magical techniques moved into Constantinople and got Christianized without becoming less effective and so on? So like when like the original words of power and the god names and so on, when those transformed over time, how did they still remain? How did they still work like they did before that? And the second question is, when you look at the classical incenses, for example, for the solar incense would be frankincense, and for the moon it would be myrrh. What would be the Jupiterian equivalent? So like the classical Jupiterian incense, as far as you know.
Okay, well, let's see. Keep that second question in mind because I'm probably going to forget and have to ask. But let me see if I got the first question straight. Now, I don't know. I don't know if Constantinople plays into it, but you're asking how, as Christian influence came into like Egyptian magic, you're saying, how did that magic continue to be effective as it was diluted by this outside influence?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because
or,
I think,
or even by specifically by Christian.
Yeah, because I think the story goes that the techniques traveled the route of going into Constantinople and from there on into Europe via Italy. So it's about how did they
Well, a
still...
lot of stuff did. Yeah, I think that's a little bit later in history, because you had Constantinople, you had Haran, you had these centers of mysticism that essentially kind of were pushed eastward as Christianity gained more and more of an empire. A lot of that was, especially like in Haran, you had Muslim-controlled territories where they were a lot more sympathetic, I guess you could say, or at least allowing of occult and mystic practices. So there's a whole story of how things kind of filtered, getting shoved back by the Christians, and so they finally kind of coalesced there in the Muslim-controlled territories, and then up through, like you said, you had into Italy, and of course you have the whole Renaissance thing there, and then into Europe. Don't forget the Byzantines too. The Solomonic tradition largely came up through the Byzantine Empire. Pretty much, and I'm simplifying here, but pretty much the oldest Solomonic text as we understand Solomonic magic, the Christian version of the Solomonic tradition to be, pretty much goes back to the Hygromantia. That's like the first real key of Solomon. And most of the keys of Solomon we have from there all extend from the Hygromantia. So that Hygromantia was itself a Byzantine text, and it came. So, but I think what you're asking though goes back a little further in history than that. So it's really before that push eastward. And you got to remember, there's 2 things you have to remember. Number one, don't forget the PGM, the Greco-Egyptian papyri. That was a result, of course, of Alexander the Great conquering Egypt, and Egypt becoming basically an extension of the Greek Empire. So we find that's where the hieroglyphic language starts to go out, and the Greek language replaces it, and you end up with Egyptian words spelled in the Greek language, and we find that a lot in the PGM. So there's one of your first instances of outside influence. So there was a lot of Grecization. I don't know how to say that, but there was a lot of Greekifying of Egyptian mysteries at that time. And it's hard to put a value judgment on it to say that that diluted anything. It kind of did, but I don't think it's because it was Greek influence. It's because before Alexander the Great, the pharaohs were in charge, and you had the priests, and the priests were extremely politically powerful people, and their tradition, the Osirian cult and the cult of Ra and even the cult of Set, and all these people had their political spheres of influence, and their tradition and their mysteries were based on that and had been for 3,000 years. So they were ancient traditions. And then Alexander comes down and just knocks all that crap down. No more pharaohs. You know, they killed off Cleopatra because she probably did not kill herself with those asps. And now you're owned by Greek and then later Rome, by Greece and then later Rome. So all of these Egyptian mysteries became now displaced. And this happens a lot. A state religion becomes displaced by new rulers, and now that state religion becomes pared down to what would be called a home version of that religion. So these guys that used to be very politically powerful priests working in lavish temples with all the money they could spend and all the temple equipment and altars they could want on hand, now they're working out of their basement. And they're working for people who are coming to them for love spells and spells to get a job and spells to heal their donkey and just things that people need from day to day. And so they take all of those mysteries they learned in the temple and they pare them down and figure out a home way to do them, a simpler way to do them, but kind of achieve the same things. And that is called magic. Those are called spells. And that's what the PGM are. Same thing with the grimoires. You had the lavish churches, but then you had this disaffected clergy and even lay people who were not in the church and did not have access to all that. And so a home version of those church rituals were created, and we get the Solomonic tradition. So it's not a watering down just because the Greeks came in, but it's because of the displacement. And I wouldn't even call it a watering down. It's a paring down, a simplification. It's not as good as what they did in those lavish temples, but it still gets the job done and it's still powerful. Now, going on with your question about Christianity, the vector for Christian influence in these Greek mysteries was that Greek influence. Christianity and Greece kind of go hand in hand. Really, I should say Christianity and Rome go hand in hand, but there's always this weird gray area between Greece and Rome, between their rulership, because they were so similar. But a lot of what we know as Greek mysteries, even Platonism, which has such a massive impact on Western occultism, that was Greek philosophy. The archangels, our Samael is very similar to Ares or Mars from the Greek and Roman pantheons. So, I mean, there's just so much influence of Greek mysteries into what became Christianity. And remember that Christianity was itself a mystery religion at first. So it was not at all in and of itself watered down. It was very steeped in ancient pagan tradition. They utilized, and remember, Christianity began in Egypt, and they utilized the Ankh. And they utilized a lot of stuff from the Greek mysteries, a lot of stuff you'll find in the PGM they were making use of. They made use of astrology, especially all those Greek constellations. They were making use of those. You can even find early churches that are decorated with astrological figures and different mythic and pagan figures. So when it stopped being Greek influence and started being just straight Christian influence, it still was not watering anything down. In these areas, once you get to Thebes, you finally get over to Constantinople, you get to Haran. Don't forget Spain, because that's where the Kabbalah was first founded in the 1200s when Moses de Leon published the Zohar. All of these are examples of places where mystics came together And this goes right back to that lecture I was giving on recognizing other people, no matter what their culture is. If they're the real deal, you'll recognize them and you'll be able to talk to them. And that's what they did in these places. So if you had some guy who was very steeped in the PGM, in the Greco-Egyptian mysteries, and he meets a Christian and a Jew and a Muslim, and they're all sitting in a tavern, there was no religious bigotry between these people. They were just talking and sharing notes. How do you do this? Oh, well, how do you do that? Oh, I've been trying this alchemical elixir and it's driving me nuts. Well, why don't you try this? And they had a blast. And a lot of what we know as the Western mystery tradition was born in those talks among those people. And they inseminated each other's traditions, and they didn't see any conflict with it. It wasn't, oh, these Christians who want to knock down altars and who deny all magic and deny, no, that didn't exist yet. That didn't come until later, once, the Council of Nicaea, that founded Catholicism, then you ended up with the Vatican, and everything just kind of, once Christianity was in political control, it was all downhill from there, basically. But those early crossbreedings happened before that. And pagans were not offended by Christians talking about Christ any more than they were offended by this guy talking about Osiris and this guy talking about Zeus. And they all knew they were all talking about the same things anyway. So it was just a big mixing pot. And I don't think it really diluted anything at all. I think what got diluted was later Christian interpretations of these old ideas, especially when they wanted to outlaw them and just get rid of them entirely. And don't forget Hollywood. Hollywood is diluted and misrepresented a whole lot in the Western mystery tradition. So we were born and raised in both of those environments. And so we kind of were raised with a lot of BS. And there's a lot of dilution there. But if you go back to the time you're talking about, and all the way back even to where I'm talking about when Alexander the Great was running around, that just didn't exist. There was a lot more openness and a lot more interbreeding between these different philosophies and religions. Mm-hmm. And I could go on. I mean, I've done so much study of the Middle East, of like the Holy Land itself, Palestine, and how it was the crossroads of all these different cultures: the Hittites, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and eventually the Greeks and the Romans, and everyone all came to Palestine because you couldn't trade with anyone anywhere without crossing through them. So, there was a lot of intermixing that went on, even amongst those old pagan cults. Gods traveled around, gods got adopted. Someone would bring a new god and they'd be like, hey, throw his idol up on the shelf, man. It was fine. So a lot of that bigotry just developed really recently in history. I mean, if you look at all of human history, that kind of religious bigotry is young and hopefully very short-lived. I mean, it's not even a full 2,000 years old. That's really how young religious bigotry is. So, and here we are today. So, hopefully a lot of our religious bigotry and shouting in the streets will be done within the next generation or two if we survive, and we can move on from it. Anyway, so did that come close to answering your first question?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.